So hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video I wanted to talk about traditional tattoos, Japanese traditional tattoos, and maybe even some neo-trad. So if that's something that interests you, then keep watching. We're going to start with American traditional. It's sometimes called American traditional. In Europe it's also just called traditional. Because it is one of the more popular art styles that have come out of tattooing. Traditional tattooing has been around since the early 1900s. There was like the Coney Island people, a lot of prominent tattoo artists like in the circus and things like that, the tattooed lady, Maud. The person that kind of brought it to the United States, made it a little bit more mainstream, and created a lot of the traditions that we follow in the tattoo industry to this day, is Sailor Jerry. His real name is Norman Keith Collins. So he made his own tattoo parlor right there in Honolulu, in Chinatown, and he never left Hawaii. So Sailor Jerry, aka Norman Collins, he would correspond with other large names in tattooing via letters. Since he refused to leave Hawaii in his tattoo shop, well, he would send his apprentices over to Japan to see what they were doing, to observe under these other masters, and then so they could bring back or write about their techniques that they're learning. And so a lot of the American traditional designs that we have today are Sailor Jerry designs. They are things that he saw in Japanese tattooing, liked. He cherry-picked some things and he discarded others, and that was kind of like the birthplace when tattooing was still very uncommon, especially here on the mainland. Sailor Jerry was one of the first people to sterilize the needles. Back then, you made your own needles, you made your own machines. Sometimes you would just dip them in the bucket and then keep going. Or he's the one that is credited for us using the autoclave to sterilize stainless steel reusable tattoo items. Previously, traditional tattoos had very strict rules that they went by. This type of line weight only, no multiple line weights at all. It had to only have these types of colors, and it only had to be this type of shading and this type of subject matter. Now, traditional style as a blanket term really just means the style. It doesn't have such strict rules anymore about line weight or colors. There are artists that are using, their own signature color palettes that are still coming out with great results in what I would call traditional tattoo. There's many artists that twist the subject matter in sort of a psychedelic way, but still has like the same style of shading and the same style of line weight as traditional tattoos. Occasionally there will be multiple line weights, but that doesn't mean it's not a traditional tattoo. And then there are other artists that use pretty much exclusively their own color palette and subject matter that is maybe not as common. And then there are artists that, still practice the American traditional sort of look, such as Austin Maples, who only works in black and gray, and his work is always phenomenal. And then there's another artist, she originally was based out of Hong Kong, and she recently moved and she's working in a UK studio. Her name is Samantha Fung. She's amazing. She does these incredible traditional pieces, and she also kind of pays homage to women in the tattoo industry, and I think that's really cool. American traditional was inspired by Japanese traditional. Japanese traditional is a style that goes back hundreds of years. Traditional Japanese tattooing is called irezumi, and the traditional method of doing irezumi is Tebori, is the tapping using either a metal or a wooden rod, and I've heard that it doesn't hurt as bad as it looks. A lot of artists in their apprenticeship, they're taught how to do at least the basics of Japanese traditional, because you do learn a lot of design elements and flow and saturation and shading techniques when it comes to that style of tattooing. So it's very beneficial for somebody to at least be a little bit knowledgeable on the aspects of it if they are a tattoo artist. In my opinion, this style of tattoo looks best when it's a whole limb, when it's a whole torso, when it's a big piece, when it's all cohesive. That's when it looks the best. You're not going to find a lot of deviation from the rules, especially not in comparison to American traditional, because the rules for this style of tattooing have been in place for centuries. Even though tattoos have been legal since 1948 in Japan, there has been such a long stigma around it. There was a few thousand years where only prisoners, slaves, and criminals got tattoos in Japan. It's one of those things that the newer generation is kind of breaking down, chipping away at. So some of the common motifs of Japanese traditional are, you see a lot of koi fish, a lot of dragons, some hanya and oni masks, you see geisha, some samurai, and of course you see something called finger waves. Finger waves, windbreaks, and cherry blossoms, sakura. So it's very common. Those are usually the subject matter when it comes to Japanese traditional, and as far as I know right now, it is not considered cultural appropriation to get Japanese traditional because it is such a widely accepted style. There are some styles of tattoo where it is considered disrespectful to get that style if you are not of that culture. This is not one of those. The Japanese people are very accepting of other people getting Japanese style tattoos. I would, though, suggest going to somebody that specializes in it. So if that's something you're interested in, do some research. Find a local artist near you or save up some money and travel to an artist that meets your needs. Next, we're going to talk about neo-trad. This style has kind of taken on its own meaning over time, because neo-trad used to mean neo, meaning new, and traditional. I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think neo-trad is kind of just like the name for this style. It's not even piggybacking off of traditional anymore. Neo-trad originally started as being just like the traditional, but instead of having just one line weight, there's at least two. And instead of only using 3 colors, there's at least 4. And instead of using this subject matter, maybe we switch it out for a different one. At least in my opinion, because when I see neo-trad work, I think of foxes, I think of mushrooms, I think of realistic looking Pokemon characters. I think of like tattoos that are very much their own thing. A very common thing for neo-traditional is having a thick line weight on the outside and then thinner line weights on the inside. And that can be for peonies or that can be for fur. I've seen it very common when people are doing portraits of animals or things like that, where they will use lines inside of the face instead of shading so that it's all one color. And I think that's really interesting. Something that's different than traditional is the use of shading and color. So in traditional, usually you have skin breaks where you have either like a spot where the color or the shading stops before it meets the line. And then in neo-traditional, it doesn't do that. It goes all the way. It's full saturation all the way to the edges. There are very little, if any, skin breaks versus a traditional tattoo, which would use skin breaks in lieu of lighter shading or highlights. There have been a lot of styles rebirthed, and a lot of styles coming up, especially in the internet age. And so we're able to see exactly what's going on in these art hubs of different areas in the world, and it's very exciting. And so this is going to be the first part of a series where we just go over what different tattoo styles mean and why there are differences for different styles. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about some more styles next time. So, thank you.